25. So far, I've done 25 Inktober pieces and 25 daily videos. This one, naturally, 24. This video is number 25 for Inktober. And today I'm going to be working on DARKSEID for DC Comics. So those of you who landed on my channel, my name is Walden Wong. I'm a comic book artist for Marvel and DC Comics. Check out my website, waldenwongart.com, to see some of my work. And also check out my Patreon. It's patreon.com/waldenwongart. Today I'm going to show you how I worked on this DARKSEID piece. How I sketched it out, how I drew everything in pencil, how I inked it, and how I'm also drawing in ink. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, so this video is about DC Comics DARKSEID. I don't really know much about DARKSEID aside that he's the father of Orion. I've also drew an Orion piece that I've done in a previous Inktober video. So if you haven't seen that yet, go back to some of my previous video and check that out. So this is his dad, and I posted this on social media, the sketch of this figure, before I started drawing details in there. With DARKSEID, he's more of a bulky character, really almost like a bodybuilder, like a really big size. So I was thinking of the Hulk when I was sketching out the anatomy of this figure. So big hands, smaller head, bigger body, just bulky. So when I'm sketching a figure out, usually I'll just sketch the whole anatomy out. The muscles, the pecs, the biceps, all of that. Even though if they're wearing a costume, I'm still sketching everything in there just for the practice so I can get used to drawing the anatomy of a human body. And after I do sketch everything in there, then I'll go back and I'll add the costume around it. Sometimes if I'm just drawing something and I'm just drawing a costume and I don't have the anatomy underneath there, there's a chance that your costume may be too tight when it's wearing it, or too bulky, or it just doesn't look like it's in the right place. So when I'm drawing, I like to have an under sketch of the figure before I start drawing clothing around it. And then I would draw the face. Faces are very important. I actually drew the face a few times. I didn't really like the angle. So this is the face for DARKSEID. So aside from DARKSEID, when I started doing research to draw this figure, again, this was also a viewer's choice. There was a couple of viewers that would ask, you should draw DARKSEID. So I figured I would draw DARKSEID. I'm not sure if he's ever going to appear in movies or have a big role in a DC comic movie. But DARKSEID, originally he had a black costume. Not a black costume, but he has more like a dark skin tone and a blue costume. Just a plain blue. And then when I started doing research, there was a couple of other costumes. And just like, back then when comic books were just comic books, every comic book character had the same costume. When movies started coming out, for example, when X-Men started coming out, they had these leather outfits. And because there was leather outfits in the movies, Marvel Comics decided to just go there and change some of the costumes for the comic books too. Same for DC Comics. DC Comics, they had the regular costumes, and for the most part, DC Comics, when they have their movie characters coming out, it's pretty similar to what they had in the comic books, but they started adding all these lines just to make it look cool, just to modernize it. Instead of wearing a spandex, there's extra lines that makes it look like a costume. Take, for example, Spider-Man. Spider-Man was just webbing, blue and red, and that was as simple as that. And then later on, when the movies came out, they started making the webbing rays, and then as more Spider-Man's movie comes out, there was Iron Spider-Man, and everything was techie. And then when you're going back to the comic books and you're looking at the comic books, they're adapting to what the movies are dictating for the characters. So which is interesting. Even though the comic book companies, they created the characters, the comic book companies are following suit of the movie directors. So that's something that's I find interesting with the comic books and movies. So here's DARKSEID. This isn't DARKSEID's original look. There's a lot of armor here, and I've never actually worked on this version of DARKSEID before. I've worked on the original blue version, how it used to be drawn, where it's just like a blue outfit. This one has all these body armor, the shoulder guards, this round circle on his chest, and then another belt buckle that looks like a V, and all these extra things just all over the place. So I'm in there. I'm just inking all the faces first, and then all the stuff that surrounds his face. And he's Darkseid. He has a helmet. He has a modern helmet. And this is another funny thing I find interesting. All these comic book characters, especially all these alien characters, they're in space. They're coming from another planet, but yet the way their shoes are, the shoes that they're wearing looks like it's manufactured in, on Earth. Like an Earthling kind of made the designs of the shoes. There's a sole of the shoe, there's a heel, there's a front part of the shoe, and there's stitchings on the shoe. So I always found that interesting. Shouldn't alien shoes be looking different, like some kind of organic, like mushy kind of shoe thing? Anyway, I digress. So back to drawing Darkseid. I used a template and I started inking certain areas that are round. Using a template, I can get that round arc much quicker. I can always do that by hand, but it will just take a little bit longer. But since I have the template with me, I might as well just use that and then use a micron to just draw that arc. Some of these other areas, I would just do freehand with a brush. If I've seen some inkers, and I'm guilty of this when I was doing inking early in my career, I would use a template to ink every line in there. I still do. And anytime I work on Iron Man, if Marvel Comics contact me and I'm working on a comic that has Iron Man in it, I will use templates or French curves or flex curves to draw every line on Iron Man, just to give it more of a techie look, more mechanical machinery look. But when I'm drawing characters or when I'm inking characters, I rather use a brush or quill just to give it more of an organic, soft look. So depending on the character, I would use certain tools. For Iron Man, I would use technical pens, repeatograph technical pens. There's lots of different tools out there for inking. And if you're interested in any of my inking tools, like the ones that you see in the videos, in any of the videos I use, please check out my website. My website is waldenwongart.com. And on my website, there's a big Amazon button. You click that button, it will lead you to an Amazon store that shows you all the art supplies that I use. So you can order any of the art supplies that you like through Amazon. And I'll add those links below the video description. So if you're interested in that, check that out. Okay, so here I ink all the holding line of Thanos first. I always like inking the holding line. Holding line is the outline of the figure. So once I ink that, and then I go back in there and I ink the inside lines, I won't run off the line. Usually I like staying in the line. It's that feeling I have when I'm inking the holding line first before I start working on the interior lines is almost like you're painting in watercolors or you're drawing in crayons. You like to surround all the areas on the outside first, and then when you work on the inside, you won't be afraid to go out the lines, which is the same feeling I get when I'm inking all the holding lines, the outline of the character or the outline of a building or the outline of a tree. I do all that first, and then I go back in there to do all the inside lines. That way I won't run off the lines off of the tree or outside of the figure or outside of a building. So when all of that is done, I decided to just erase everything. And then the erasing part, it's just random where I feel like it. Sometimes I'll just ink the whole piece and sign my name. And when I'm done, I'll just erase it. In this case, I decided to erase halfway and then go back in there and start doing rendering details. Hatch lines, cross hatch lines in all of the costume areas on the side of his waist. Just certain areas. And then I'm using a micron pen. In my previous video where you saw me work on Deathstroke, I would just use a crow quill, which requires a lot of dipping. That previous video where I worked on Deathstroke, that took the longest because I was dipping the pen a lot of times. So when I started out doing these Inktober pieces, I didn't really want each piece to be more than 3 hours. That Deathstroke took more than 3 hours. This one here, this Darkseid, was pretty quick. It was maybe around 2 hours, 15 minutes, around there. So the quicker I can do these sketches, the better it is. So I won't spend too much time. Like I'm thinking when convention season starts back up, and then people ask me to do these sketches, I can work on the speed. Because back then, when I go to a convention, it would take me almost like 2-3 hours to do one sketch, and then all the sketches would pile up, and I would go to the hotel, go back to the hotel at nighttime, and then finish up the sketches, and then bring it back to the convention the next day. And I've had times where there was so much commissions for me to work on that I would just not even sleep at night at the hotel. I would just work through the night so I would have it back for the person who commissioned me to draw the piece ready. So now with all these Inktober practice, I'm working on my speed, and I do find myself getting a little bit quicker. And as I say, just with anything, the more you practice, the better you get at it, and the quicker you get at it, and the more efficient you are. And here I'm just going back in there with a brush, and I'm thickening up some of the lines just to make certain areas pop a little bit better. Sometimes when you're inking and then you erase the pencils underneath, they're almost all the time, some of the black ink will just turn gray a little bit, depending on what type of ink you're using. The ink I'm using on this video is a Speedball ink, which is a nice reflective ink. I also use Higgins Black Magic, and another type of ink I like to use is Color Repeatograph Universal ink. Those are the three inks that I like to use. So when I use Universal Color ink, that's when I put the ink inside the repeatograph pins. When I'm using the Black Magic ink, the little bottle that has a dropper, I use that for crow quills, where I'm like feeding the quill. And then for brushwork, which is here, I'm actually dipping the brush into a Speedball ink. I think Speedball ink has the most reflective, and it stays dark the longest time. So I'm part of the, let's see, what do they call it? Speedball has a professional network on their website. If you look at Speedball's website and look at their professional artist network, you see my name there. I'm one of their artists for their professional network. So yeah, their Speedball has been very kind with me. They'll every so often they'll send me some art supplies to review, to use, to show, to make videos of. So they're very nice. They're nice clients. Okay, so here I'm inking Darkside Shoes black, even though it wasn't black. I just decided to give it more of a contrast because it was just not enough contrast. The more contrast and shadows you can add to your art, the better it'll look. Like I said in the previous video where I drew Deathstroke, I wasn't going to add any black into that video, or I wasn't going to add black for his pants or his shoes or some of the sheen on his armor, like where I'm inking now. But I decided if I add it, it just brings out the character more. So aside from the color of the character, when you're painting or when you're coloring on for computer or your artwork, you also need to think about shadows, because sometimes if the light source doesn't hit a certain area and there's a shadow there, a white pair of sneakers can be black because it's just a shadow over there. So here I'm just randomly adding more lines to show the folds of the knuckles, and then on the helmet I'm beefing up some of the lines on the inside to show that there's a little bit of shadow on the side of the helmet that's touching his skin. Okay, and Darkside has this rough skin texture, almost like you see, like a tree texture. So on his arms, I gave it that rough texture, and also his face, I gave it that kind of a rough, dry lava texture. So later on, you'll see me inking some of those texture for his arms. And then on his armor, I decided to add a lot of cracks. And these cracks, they're just random lines, random tick lines, dots, just no patterns, just going into a lot of different directions. So that it gives it some kind of a texture on his body armor. Okay, more body armor, more tick lines, more scratches. I imagine he's been fighting a lot, and then he's been on the ground rolling around, and then his armor is just battle damaged. And then here's his arm texture, kind of that dry lava texture. So I'll just draw some of those in and then add some shadows into the texture. And then I'll just continue adding more texture to the face and shadows, add some hatch lines just to give it more depth to the artwork as best as I can. Yeah, and then at this point, I'm pretty happy with how Thanos is coming out. So I go in there on his chest emblem, and I try to make it have that glow. So I give the outside more of a shade and the inside lighter. So I'm actually doing 4 times cross hatching. I'll cross hatch one direction, and then another direction, and then 45-degree in the opposite 2 directions. So that's 4 times cross hatching. And when everything is done, I go back there with a white gel pen. This gel pen is called the Geliro. I also use the Signal Uniball. So again, check out my website, go to my Amazon link. If you're interested in buying any of those art supplies, it'll be available there. And then here's the Darkside piece right over here, all done. So there you have it. That's number 25 of the Inktober pieces. I'm gonna put this with the rest of my stack. And I know some of you are saying 25, but today's not the 25th. Inktober's 31 days. I'm actually gonna go beyond October because I'm drawing these first and then I'm actually editing the videos and uploading it later. So even when October ends, I'm still gonna have 31 Inktober pieces for you to see. And then when all that's done, I'm gonna be scanning all these, uploading it to my website and making it available for sale. So if you're interested in that, check out my website. Again, my website is waldenwongart.com, and also check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/waldenwongart. So until then, I just hope to see you tomorrow, and I hope you enjoy me drawing this Inktober piece. Take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.